My name is Dr. Langley. I'm a family doctor here in Colorado Springs at Pine Ridge Family Medicine. And one of the nice things about being a doctor is I get asked super intimate personal questions all the time about what's normal and what's not. And I talk about them all the time. And it's just gotten to the point where I'm not intimidated by them anymore. So I realize there's actually a lot of confusion about the women's reproductive cycle that I talk to people all the time. I go on a regular basis up to a high school in Denver and talk about natural family planning and how it works with the endocrine system and how one can track a female's cycles and see what's going on with her reproductively and her hormones. So I thought I'd share a little bit with you on YouTube here in case you have similar questions. So the basic question, what is a woman's period? Well, that takes a little bit of background first. One of the big differences between men and women is that men are fertile all the time. Men are always making sperm in their testicles and they travel out during ejaculation and could always result in a baby. They could always contribute to a baby in a pregnancy. Women, on the other hand, they only release eggs, which is their contribution to the baby, every once a month. Just for a couple days every month is the time that she's fertile. And that means that over the course of the month, lots of things are changing to allow her body to release those eggs and for her to prepare for the potential of receiving that baby in her body and allowing it to grow. Because she not only has to contribute that egg to make a baby, but also make a spot for that developing baby to grow up and become big and strong. So that requires a lot of hormonal changes and physical changes in our body. So the way that we have come to talk about that for a woman's cycle is that things change over the course of 28 days, roughly. Some cycles are a little bit longer, some shorter, and that can sometimes be a sign of a problem and sometimes be completely normal. So we just, as a society, have decided that day one is the first day of a woman's period. So she starts bleeding. Now, what is that blood? So we're going to mark that here. Here's the bleeding. And it usually starts out a little bit lighter, gets a little bit heavier, and then gets a little bit lighter over the course of maybe 3 to 7 days of bleeding from the vagina. And that blood is actually coming from her uterus. So basic anatomy of a woman is that there's a pear. It looks kind of like a pear, a little bit smaller, a pear-shaped organ called a uterus. It's actually a muscle. So you can imagine it's like a stomach, only it's sitting way down in the pelvis. The stomach is a muscle too, and it has a very different function, obviously, than receiving food. And the uterus is about like that. The bottom has a little hole in it where it connects to the vagina, and that's the cervix where it opens up for a baby to be delivered or for the sperm to travel through to create that baby in the first place. So this is where a baby potentially could grow, but for the most part, it sits empty, but it wants to prepare for the potential of a sperm and an egg meeting and being able to implant in that uterus. And one of the ways it does that preparation is by building up an area for the baby to implant the uterus into, implant the placenta into. So it wants to have lots of blood flow to the baby to help the baby to get the oxygen and the nutrients that come from the mom to the baby. So in order to make that possible, there has to be a lot of blood vessels being made inside that uterus for the baby and the placenta to connect to. And that's what gets broken down and looks like blood as a period, is those blood vessels. So that's what's going on is when a woman ovulates and the egg goes through and nothing happens and there's no baby to implant, the hormones in the woman change to signal her that she's not pregnant. And the uterus gets that signal. And so the body says, okay, well, we didn't need this bunch of blood vessels. And the blood vessels break down through a pretty cool chemical process. And they come out of the cervix and out of the vagina as blood. And that's what a woman's period is. It happens every month because every month a woman ovulates and so has the potential to get pregnant. But if she doesn't, she has to kind of cleanse herself and many societies and my religion, blood is seen as blood from Christ cleans us of our sins. And so that's another way to think of it with the menstrual cycle too, is it's a chance for the woman's body to clean herself out and get ready for the next month and the potential for a baby that month. Just to draw this out a little bit more so it's a little bit clearer. So this is the cervix, and that's where a woman has a pap smear taken from. So cervical cancer would be a cancer if this is a vagina and this is the outside. So the outside of a woman's genitalia are the labia majora and the labia minora on the inside. Totally normal women for labias to be longer or shorter or one longer than the other. Totally a normal thing. Don't think that you're abnormal for that. It's very, very common. And then the vaginal tract. So the cervix is a place that you can get cancer, just like anywhere. You could get cancer on the tip of your nose, but it's easier to see the tip of your nose that it starts looking funny. The cervix is a place that it's awkward to get to, but it's still not quite impossible to get to. So it's worth being able to do a pap smear, a pelvic exam, and a pap smear on a regular basis to make sure there's not cancer growing there. So what a doctor does during a pap smear is uses a speculum to be able to see that cervix to make sure they're collecting cells from the right place, and then uses basically a spoon to, just like you could touch a spoon to any part of your body and get some cells that you could then look at under a microscope and see if there's any signs of cancer. That's exactly what is happening during a pap smear. A pap smear is called that because the guy who invented it, his last name was Papa Nicolau, and they thought Papa Nicolau was a little bit too long, so they call it PAP for short. So the pap smear isn't a pelvic exam. Sometimes there are medical reasons that a woman needs a pelvic exam to look down here and take a look to see if there are any problems. But a pap smear is different. A pap smear is not only when they do that exam, that pelvic exam, but also when they collect those cells. They use a special tool that looks like a spoon, just like I was just saying, or sometimes a brush, to collect those cells, put them in a special liquid that preserves them, and send them to a pathologist who looks at them under a microscope to check for if there's any signs of cancer. So that's the difference between a pelvic exam and a pap smear. Both very important parts of staying healthy and examining for potential problems. So just to flesh this out a little bit more, there's also fallopian tubes that connect to ovaries. Ovaries are about the size of almonds, pretty small, one on each side, and those are where the eggs are produced. And cysts form as those eggs are maturing. So women frequently have a bunch of small cysts of all different ages of eggs that are maturing, and whichever one happens to win the race and mature the fastest is released and travels through the fallopian tubes and has a chance of becoming pregnant. That is something that happens usually around the middle of the cycle. So that's ovulation day. We'll call it OD, somewhere in the middle there. And there's hormones that change throughout the month. Usually the estrogen is what dominates the first part of the cycle. And then the second half of the cycle is dominated by progesterone. I like to think of it as progestation, or that's the hormone that's going to continue being released if the woman does get pregnant. Will continue to go up and up and up to support that pregnancy. It's progestation, pro-pregnancy, progesterone. And there's ways of charting a woman's cycle to figure out when she's ovulating, and so figure out when are the few days that she can become pregnant that month, as well as be able to figure out problems with the woman's hormone levels based on how long each of these cycles last, the beginning phase with the estrogen and the second half with the progesterone, also called the luteal phase. So it's an interesting thing to know about, and it's an important thing as human beings. It's normal for girls to start getting their periods usually in the early preteens to early teenage years is common for getting your first period. Usually women can kind of know that they're heading towards that way. They start getting pubic hair and breast development first, and that kind of clues them in that it's coming up soon. And that's a good time to start talking with your doctor, with your mom, about how to deal with periods. They're usually able to be predicted if you can chart your cycle like this. There's often apps out there that are helpful, and then learning how to use hygiene products for collecting that blood so it doesn't stain everywhere, because although it's a cleaning process, it's still a pain to clean the stains out of your clothes and sheets and towels. So learning how to use tampons, pads, menstrual cups, they're all reasonable options. And that's certainly not everything we could talk about on this topic, but feel free to leave questions on what I should talk about next. And I hope that you learned something. In the meantime, this video might also be interesting to you, and be sure to subscribe to our channel here. Thanks for watching.